Today we're going to use lifting grace notes to separate notes of the same pitch in bagpipe music. Stay tuned. Well, hello everybody, I'm Willis Bagpiper, and on this channel I make videos to make you a stronger and more confident piper. If you like this kind of content, please think about subscribing to the channel, giving me one of these right here, all of that stuff, ringing the bell, it all means more than you know. I also give Skype lessons if you want more personalized instruction, but more on that later. In the description below, there's a link to the PDF right here, so go ahead, print that out, put it on a tablet, have it in front of you so you can follow along. In today's video, we're pairing with the Glenlivet 18. Elegant, complex oak and fruit, an enticing bittersweet symphony is how it's described. Nice arrival, still building. Love this stuff. I remember when I started learning the pipes, I was rather surprised at exactly how limited the tools were that we have as pipers to make music on our instrument. Normally, you'd have 4 possible things you can do to make music on a melodic instrument, an instrument that can play one note at a time, like a flute or a trumpet. So number 1, you can change pitch, how low or high the note is that is coming out of the instrument. Number 2, you can change your rhythm, how long or short you're holding any given pitch against a given meter. So you can make a note long, you can make a note short. On other instruments, you can pause or rest. You can actually stop the sound so you can make notes in succession of the same pitch, or even pause to give some dramatic effect or for all sorts of other reasons. And then number 4, we have dynamics. We can make a note louder, or we can make a note quieter, and everything in between. However, on the practice chanter, and moreover on the pipes, we don't have that. We have only the ability to change the pitch of our note and the duration of our note. So what if we wanted to go about trying to play more than one note in a row of the same pitch? What are we going to do? If we can't stop the sound on the pipes with our tongue or our airflow, what are we going to do? And that's where grace notes come in. So the first grace notes we're going to learn, I call lifting grace notes. These are grace notes that are caused by the lifting and then lowering of your fingers. We're going to learn several different styles of grace notes. We're going to learn other grace notes that involve a lowering motion and then they come back up. But for these, the thing that initiates the sound is a lifting motion. So I'm going to call these lifting grace notes. As you can see here on the printout, there are 3 primary lifting grace notes. They are the G grace note, the D grace note, and the E grace note. These are named for the topmost finger that is coming off in each one. So if we think about how you would finger a high G on the pipes, you'd be right here. 3 on the bottom, just the thumb on the top. But what's the topmost finger that's coming off? It's that pointer finger. This is the G. So when we see these G grace notes, the small notes with 3 flags, we're not lifting to a true high G. We're lifting just one finger so that we can hit that G grace note. The pitch of the note is not going to be perfect, but the duration of the note is short enough that it doesn't really matter. It gives you enough of an effect of that G, enough of the pitch of that G, but it's more of a percussive sound that you're going to use to create the illusion of separation of notes. At least that's how we're going to use them today. You can separate notes with lifting grace notes up to the note underneath the grace note. What? You can't separate a G with a G. If you're already on high G, you can't lift this finger yet again. You could lower the same finger for a quick tapping motion, but think about what's coming out. If you were to do that, that's a tapping or striking or lowering motion, and you're actually hitting a brief F. I don't tend to name fingers. There's a lot of books out there that would call this the G finger. Well, it's the G finger when it's coming up, but it's the F finger when it's coming down. So just to avoid confusion, I just call fingers by what they are, by what hand they're on, top or bottom. I don't tend to use left or right because there are people that switch their grip, but top and bottom and which, so we got pointer or index, middle, ring, and so forth. The motion we're looking for when playing a grace note is a small and quick motion. I don't want a large lifting motion, and I don't want a slow lifting motion. There is a certain amount of tension in your finger when you play these grace notes. I don't want you crushing the chanter, and I don't want you pinching the grace notes out because you have too much pressure. But at the same point, I don't want big, loose, sloppy grace notes. The grace notes have to have a certain cha and crispness to them, or they just aren't going to, well, sound like grace notes on a bagpipe. So I'm lifting my finger, I don't know, about 3/4 of an inch at most. Yeah, for the folks in America, about a dime, maybe a little bit more than a dime high as I'm lifting it. What we're not looking for, we don't want is big motions. At that point, the tonality of the G is really clear, and it's going to sound more like an actual melody note in whatever exercise or tune you're playing, rather than a percussive separation of notes of the same pitch. At the same point, we don't want to pinch them out. One of them didn't even fire. I was really squeezing way too hard. So we want a certain amount of tension, but definitely not too much, but we don't want it too loose either. Like so many things, it's kind of the baby bear situation. To start getting that G grace note under control, I have a basic scale here. It's nothing terribly exciting. We're going to just walk up the scale. I do want you to note, we're separating each one of these notes with grace notes, but we are not changing notes with grace notes. That's going to be a video for another time, and when it's ready, there'll be a card up there taking you to that. But changing notes with grace notes is quite a bit more challenging than separating notes with grace notes, and this has to come first. Also note, it has a grace note at the very beginning. How the heck are you going to do that? Well, you're going to start with whatever note you're on. In this case, it's a low G. You're going to have your grace note finger in the air, and as you start blowing, you'll lower the finger. You're going to find that many, if not most pipe tunes are actually going to start with grace notes like that, so get used to it. So in looking at this, we're going to separate each note from low G to F into 4 notes. We're going to do that by using the G grace note to separate them. Again, we're stopping at F because once you get to high G, you don't have the G grace note available to you anymore. I have a metronome right here. This is the Frozen Ape Tempo app. I have people ask me what app I use. In this case, it's the Frozen Ape Tempo app. To be honest, though, there's a ton of great metronomes out there. They all work fantastic. It doesn't really matter. If you have a metronome already that works great, use that one. If you don't, I've had great luck with this one. It's a metronome. You're aiming to get your grace note on the beat. You want to think about the chirp of this metronome being basically the same size and placement of the grace notes in the music in this case. So as we hear this, you can hear right on the beat. We're going to try to do that. It's also okay if you find that you're going just after the metronome. If you're dragging just a little bit, that's not the worst thing in the world. There's entire styles of music where actually playing slightly behind the beat is what you're looking for. In piping, we tend to be more kind of right on the beat, but you don't want to be ahead of the beat in any kind of music that I'm aware of. So aim to get your grace notes right on the metronome, or maybe even just slightly after. And as you're playing this, you're welcome to work your way back down the scale. Just kind of look at it the other way if you need to. I wanted to try to keep this as succinct as possible so you didn't have to download 5 pages and print them all out. But you're welcome to work your way back down the scale if you want. So those are G grace notes. The G grace note is going to be by far the most common grace note you're going to play. It's kind of the primary grace note of the 3 primary grace notes. The next grace note we're going to learn is the D grace note. Again, pointer finger, but this time on the bottom hand. And let's think about this real quick. If it's on the bottom hand, we're only going to be able to separate low G, A, B, and C. Again, once you get to D, if you're to tap that one finger, you're going down to a C, and that's going to be in another video. Even though we bring our hand back down for E, F, G, and high A, that's not going to do much. There's a sound, but I wouldn't call it a particularly, pleasant one, and it doesn't do a great job of separating. So we're not going to use D grace notes in this context once you get to E. So again, we're only going to be able to separate 4 notes using D grace notes. All the same rules apply. I don't want it too big and loose. I definitely don't want it pinched. Perfect, small amount of tension in the finger that, it's definitely kind of smacking down on the chanter a little bit, but not because you're pinching it the entire way. A silly thing I often say to my students is imagine if you had like a button with elastic thread sewn to a table. You lift the button and it smacks back down. That's kind of the idea of how you want your finger moving on the chanter when you're playing these grace notes. Let's move on to these D grace notes. You're free again to go back down the scale if you want using those D grace notes. The third primary grace note is the E grace note. This is the ring finger on the top hand. And when it comes to the ring finger on the top hand, this is where a lot of people have questions about their pinky. I've addressed it in a few other videos, but if you hadn't seen those, we'll talk about it here for just a second. Where should your pinky go? This is a great time to kind of start to figure that out. For some people, if they have their pinky floating above the chanter, which is how I tend to play myself, it can make this grace note a little loose for some. They might get big bloopy sounding grace notes rather than clean ch kind of grace notes. For other people, including me, if you tuck your pinky under, this finger ends up getting tight to the point where I find it doesn't even fire reliably. I can't always even get it off the chanter. So for me, I want my pinky above. For others, the pinky should be underneath. As you play through this exercise in particular, line 4 here, you're going to want to maybe try it both ways. Try it with your pinky underneath, try it with your pinky up. See if one of them feels more natural or gives you a better sounding grace note, and stick with that one. Again, you want the E grace notes landing right on the metronome or even just slightly after. You want to fall back on that beat. Don't rush. Keep it clean. Keep your grace notes nice and chirpy. Not too tight, not too loose. Again, you can work your way back down. And remember, we're stopping on D with this E grace note because once you get to E, if you were to tap that, in this case, you'd actually get a full low A because of the bottom hand position. But again, this finger, it's only an E grace note when it's a lifting motion that's starting the grace note. It is not, if it's lowering, it's a tapping motion and a different note is coming out. So the G, D, and E are the primary grace notes, and they're going to make up the vast majority of the grace notes you're going to play on the Highland bagpipes. That said, there are other grace notes. These are the rest of the fingers. Every finger on this has its own grace note, and we're going to work through them all right now. So for low A, this is probably the least common. I can't say I've necessarily even seen one of these, but theoretically you could, and it's a great exercise for the pinky, so we're going to do it. There's only one note you can separate with a low A grace note, and it's low G, because once again, you're to A, you can't do it, and that's tapping a G. So I have 2 bars of it just to give you a little bit of exercise time on it, but we're just going to be with the pinky. I'm going to do my best to keep it nice and with a certain amount of tension, a certain amount of cha to it, but it's the pinky moving by itself. We'll see what happens. You could hear that last grace note for me was even a little big. It's a great exercise to build up a little bit of extra dexterity in your hand. Moving on, we have the B grace note. Now this is actually, for the alternative grace notes, a rather common one. There are several embellishments, tarluas from D, grips from D, rodents. These are all embellishments that are going to use this B grace note on low G in particular. So this is one to really kind of start focusing on a little bit now and get that dexterity working in your ring finger. And remember, it's just the ring finger as we're doing these. With all of these motions, these lifting grace notes are single finger motions when we're using them to separate notes. So no going to a real B from G, even if you think that's easier. It's just the one finger. I call this the conservation of finger energy principle. Well, not really, but I would if that didn't take so long. B grace notes. Spend some time on that one. That's a tricky finger to get going. C grace notes. Now, the only embellishment I'm aware of that has a C grace note off the top of my head is the darada, which, that's a video for a future time. 3 low G's separated by a D and a C grace note. That's beyond the scope of this video, but this is a grace note that gets used in an embellishment in more advanced pipe music, and it's a great sounding embellishment. So start practicing it now, so when you get to the darados, you'll be ready to play them. Feel free to walk back down the scale if you want. Now we're moving on to F. D and E were covered under the primary grace notes, so this is the next note as we kind of work the fingers up from the bottom. Now with F, if you're going to be getting into pibroch, the classical music, kill more of the pipes, you're going to find that the F is just as important as any of these other primary grace notes. So if you are going to focus on pibroch, or that's something that interests you, I would definitely make these F grace note exercises part of your daily warm-up practice routine, because they're going to be super important. For everybody else, they really only show up in E doublings. But that said, the E doubling is arguably the most common bagpipe embellishment that we're going to have. And I have a video on doublings that'll be linked up here for those that are a little bit more advanced or want to see what's coming in the future. But it's the middle finger. It can be rather hard, especially when it's closed down here, to move well with good, clean dexterity and tone and all of that stuff. And with the F grace note, we have most of the scale. We can go from low G all the way up to an E, separating with this particular grace note. Let's see how it works. And remember, it's just the middle finger by itself. We're not lifting both of these for a proper F. It's an F grace note, single finger motion, just that one finger. Now we're going to do the high A grace note, and we're only going to separate high G with it. While technically you could separate all these other notes, you're not going to. You're going to use a G grace note to separate any other note with high A. Now we'll eventually, when we get to changing notes with grace notes, we're going to use high A's in and around high G to move to the rest of the scale. But again, topic for another video. For today, we're separating notes, and the only note we need to worry about separating with our high A or thumb is the high G. And again, it's a single finger motion. We're not bringing our ring finger down every time. We're just going to be kind of tapping our thumb. That could be a little difficult. You might find that it's even missing a little bit. So make sure this one's not lifting too high in particular. Now, normally in pipe music, you're not going to see a bunch of high A grace notes in rapid succession like this separating. You would probably either maybe even sweep, which again, doing. You'd either sweep, which we're going to get to in a future video, or you would separate it with maybe one and then maybe a tap of another finger. We'll do tapping in another video as well. Today's about lifting grace notes, so that's awkward. I've never seen a tune do this, but if you can do it here, you'll definitely be able to do it later. Well, there you go, everybody. That's separating notes of the same pitch with grace notes. One of the things we have to do on the Highland pipes because we don't have the ability to... You can do it on here. You're not going to be able to do it on the pipe, so I don't recommend tonguing the notes on your practice chanter either. Well, thank you so much, everybody. If you got something out of this, please think about liking the video, maybe even subscribing to the channel. All that stuff helps more than you know. For those that want to go the extra mile, I do have a Patreon where a small monthly donation goes a long way to helping support the channel. There's a link in the description below or written right here. Head over there, and as little as $1 a month can really help, well, me make videos like this for you. For those that want more personalized instruction, I do give Skype lessons, and I teach people now all over the world, which is fantastic. Go ahead and head over to www.mattpiper.com or email me with whatever is down there, and we'll get you going. Well, thank you guys so much again for watching. I'm Matt Willis Bagpiper, and until next time, cheers.